In this video, you'll be learning about this topic. In my opinion, the big enchilada of what in the world's going on, and it's this binary situation of deflation versus inflation and kind of what policy is going to pop out of what we're seeing right now. So I'm kind of curious, just your overall thoughts when somebody says deflation versus inflation.
Deflation, always have been. Firstly, the trend's in my favor. And secondly, I just think that with an aging population, a debt dynamic like we've got, a relatively strong dollar, and technology, it's almost impossible to generate meaningful ongoing inflation. And we'll come into some of the big changes that could come from fiscal and stuff like that, and we'll talk through that a bit. But I think generally overall, that's the super trend you've got to fight. Now, what do you call inflation and what do you call deflation? That's the other thing, is definitional issues here. So I think that fiat currencies are deflating versus hard assets. That's not necessarily price inflation. I'm about to write a piece for Global Macro Investor about wage deflation versus actual inflation. Maybe it's wages, because when you look at most goods versus the price of gold and stuff like that, they haven't really changed price. So it could be that wages are deflating, which is something I want to dig into, because real wages haven't gone up since 1974. So there's a number of issues here, but I'm very much biased towards deflation for now.
Michael Saylor, on the other hand, said that inflation is happening in pretty much everything you need. Medical would be an example. Real estate would be another. What are your thoughts on that?
One thing is the millennials themselves are driving it, because they're trying to get into property at the same time. They can only afford the same kind of price range. Well, guess what? They've all pushed themselves out of it. Rich people have obviously had too much money because they've had access to credit, unlike average people. So that's pushed up the value of those things. We've seen, fine art and wines go to crazy prices, cars, because of the same thing, of the money of the rich people. Then there's the stuff around which corporates have power in Washington, and that is pharmaceuticals, healthcare, and some levels of food and stuff like that. So look, it's a really complicated world. Inflation is not a straightforward CPI thing, but you do find your fixed cost of living has gone up while cost of consumer goods has collapsed.
We were interviewing Lyn Alden, who, in my personal opinion, is just unbelievably smart. And she was making the case for, because at the end of the day, this is all revolving around CPI and the premium in the fixed income market above CPI. And she was making the argument, I asked her, well, how do you measure quote unquote inflation of the monetary supply, of the currency supply? She says, well, I'm just looking at the printing that's getting listed onto the balance sheets of the central banks. Maybe we can use that as CPI. What do you think of that idea?
As I said, there's different measures of inflation for different things. The other thing I know is my inflation is different to your inflation. So I just think that the whole thing is arcane. So what are we trying to solve for here? What do we care about here? We don't have bond yields that are going to offset anything. That game's gone. And we can get into the discussion about Bitcoin and gold and that kind of stuff to offset the devaluation of currency. I think the real issue is incomes don't go up enough. And that's the real issue here. In the 1970s, we had inflation because wages went up and pushed up cost of goods. We don't have that. We have wages that just do not go up. And that's the biggest problem here. So I'm not sure we're always searching for the wrong enemy. I think globalization was one of the enemies. I'm a globalist in many respects, but globalization destroyed wages because you had global wage arbitrage. Then you throw in technology on top. What chance does anybody have? There are literally going to be no bus drivers in 10 years' time. There'll be no truck drivers in 15 years' time. There will be no cab drivers. All of these jobs just get all destroyed. Mark Andreessen's "Software is Eating the World" was probably one of the most profound statements I've ever seen. And so there is this really weird dichotomy. There's massive deflation. As you said, there's the cost of living inflation, stuff like healthcare and housing. And then there's the massive deflation in the value of fiat currencies. This is a complicated dynamic.
Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on the next podcast episode and new investing resources.
What are your takeaways and thoughts on this discussion? Let us know in the comments section below.